Welcome to the Vault of Tales, a treasure trove of science fiction stories. Today, we follow a desperate battle on the distant world of Le Pollard, where a primitive alien tribe faces an unstoppable nightmare, a monstrous, ever-evolving predator. Their weapons are useless, their strongest warriors crushed until a lone human soldier dares to defy the impossible. With nothing but sheer determination and a single, desperate gamble, he calls fire from the heavens in a final stand against the beast. Will they survive, or has their fate already been sealed? Let's get started. Matthew Gallagher knelt, pressing his gloved hand against the cold, barren soil of Le Pollard. The air was thinner than Earth's, tinged with a faint metallic scent and an unfamiliar dampness. Around him, towering green-hued rock formations jutted from the ground like the fossilized remains of ancient warriors. Overhead, the sky was veiled in drifting crimson mist, swirling like specters in the wind. Le Pollard was no stranger to hunters. But for Matthew, this was his first venture into the untamed northern wilds, a place where only the most reckless dared to test their luck. He tightened his grip on the old model plasma rifle, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain, noting every rock, every strand of violet grass. Every step had to be precise. This planet was teeming with patient predators. His target this time, a Draken Maul, a lethal apex hunter. Its steel-like scales shimmered under any light, its claws sharp enough to rend combat armor. One well-placed shot, just beneath the throat, would be enough to bring it down. A low wind howled through the twisted flora, carrying with it flecks of glowing dust that drifted like dying embers. Matthew pressed himself against a jagged rock. Raising his scope, his breath slowed as he scanned the alien jungle ahead. Beneath the dagger like leaves of massive blood-red trees. He spotted the signs, deep claw marks etched into the bark, scattered metallic blue scales, and most importantly, a fresh trail of thick, violet ichor still warm to the touch. The Draken Maul was close. He inhaled deeply, steadied his aim, and adjusted the rifle's sights. His finger brushed the trigger. Then, movement, fast, unnatural, a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, cutting through the mist with almost ghostly agility. Matthew's brow furrowed, not the Draken Maul, not human, either. Something else. He adjusted the scope, zooming in, a humanoid figure, slender, agile, their skin gleamed with an iridescent violet sheen beneath the planet's eerie green glow. They wore a form-fitting armor of flexible leather, intricate patterns etched along their arms and legs, and their eyes, sharp, piercing, held a confidence laced with an undeniable sense of pride. Matthew's pulse quickened. A native of Le Pollard? No records mentioned an intelligent humanoid species here. He had encountered many alien races before. But this was something different. Why was she here? Then, as if sensing his gaze, she turned, their eyes locked through the scope, and for a fleeting second, Matthew felt as though she was staring straight through him, reading him, knowing him. His grip tensed, and in that fraction of hesitation, he made a mistake. His finger pressed the trigger. Boom! The plasma shot tore through the silence, cutting through the mist in a streak of blue energy. Matthew's stomach twisted the moment he realized he had fired. She moved fast, too fast for any human, but not fast enough. The shot grazed her shoulder, searing fabric and leaving a thin trail of scorched skin. She staggered slightly, then righted herself, her expression shifting into something sharp, something dangerous. Matthew froze, his mind racing. He hadn't meant to shoot. It had been instinct, an unconscious reaction, but it didn't matter, because in the distance, something else had heard the gunfire. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from beyond a mist. Then another, and another. Shadows shifted within the crimson fog, massive forms moving between the trees. Matthew's breath caught in his throat. The real hunt had just begun. Matthew held his breath. The shadows in the mist moved faster now, circling him like predators closing in on their prey. His grip tightened around the plasma pistol, eyes darting for an escape route. But before he could act, a voice rang out, a clear, commanding tone that sliced through the tension like a blade. Chivator Nashaka. Instantly, the figures halted, the mist thinned, revealing their true forms, not savage beasts, but tall humanoids with pale violet skin and eyes that glowed in the dim light. They wore intricately crafted leather armor, each piece adorned with patterns unfamiliar to him. Their weapons, forged from an unknown material, shimmered subtly in the fading haze, and at the center of them all stood the woman he had shot. She was striking in a way that defied logic, eyes burning gold, framed by platinum hair pulled tightly back, revealing sharp, elegant features, bioluminescent markings traced along her temples, pulsing faintly in rhythm with her breath. Her form-fitting armor accentuated a physique that was both graceful and powerful. Even wounded, she stood tall, her gaze like a dagger pressed against his throat. Matthew realized his mistake, a grave one. He opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, but a sharp, cold sensation against his neck froze him in place. A blade, humming with a soft blue glow, hovered inches from his skin. The warrior wielding it glared at him with pure, unfiltered hatred. "Wait," Matthew raised his hands, palms open, voice steady but urgent. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know who you were." The woman scoffed, her voice low, laced with bitter amusement. "A stranger armed with foreign weapons trespasses into our lands, shoots me, and now says it was an accident?" Matthew didn't need to understand every word. The tone said enough. Before he could react, something struck the back of his head, a brutal, calculated blow. His vision blurred, the world spun. Then, darkness. He woke to pain, a dull, throbbing ache that pulsed through every limb. His arms were bound, restrained by something that looked like vines, yet felt as strong as woven steel. The cavern around him stretched high, its ceiling lost in a web of bioluminescent roots clinging to the stone. A faint, unfamiliar scent filled the air, earthy, yet tinged with something alien. Dozens of them surrounded him, silent, watching, and at the center, she stood again. Matthew swallowed hard. There was no doubt now, she was someone important. A leader, or at the very least, a warrior of high standing. A male warrior stepped forward, slamming the butt of his spear into the ground. His voice was deep, resonant with authority. He didn't understand the words, but their weight was unmistakable. "He shot Zyra. He is the enemy." Zyra, so that was her name. Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors. Some nodded in agreement, others studied him, uncertain. The air grew heavy with unspoken judgment. Matthew tensed. This was bad. Then, without warning, Zyra raised a hand. The crowd silenced instantly. She stepped closer, her golden eyes never leaving his. She studied him, not with anger, but with something else, a quiet calculation. "Who are you?" The words, this time in English, were rough, deliberate, as if each syllable was foreign on her tongue. Matthew blinked, momentarily surprised. "Matthew Gallagher," he said slowly. "I'm a hunter. I never meant to harm you." Zyra didn't respond. She simply watched him, those piercing eyes scanning his every movement, every breath. Then, she turned and spoke a single command. The warriors stepped back, and then, the creature emerged. Sleek, lethal, its silhouette a fusion of feline grace and predatory menace. Its silver-tinted fur shimmered under the glow of the cavern, and its eyes, large, piercing, and unsettlingly intelligent, locked onto him. Razor-sharp talons clicked against the stone as it advanced. Matthew's breath caught. He didn't dare move. The beast circled him, sniffing the air, its muscles coiled with restrained power. Then, something flickered through him, a sensation like static skimming his skin, an invisible force pressing against his mind. The warriors whispered among themselves. Matthew turned to Zyra, realization dawning. This tribe, this people, weren't just in tune with nature. They were connected to it, and right now, they were using it to judge him. A grizzled warrior stepped forward, placing a hand on the beast's head and whispering something in a language Matthew couldn't understand. The creature let out a low growl but then retreated into the shadows, leaving Matthew with more questions than answers. But there was no time for answers. Zyra stepped closer, her golden eyes glowing under the flickering firelight. "You've caused trouble, now prove you deserve to live." Before Matthew could react, another figure emerged from the crowd. Raul Kor. The man was a giant in every sense of the word, easily half a head taller than Matthew. His body sculpted like a god of war. His bronze-toned skin gleamed in the firelight, adorned with intricate tattoos that curled around his arms like the marks of some ancient force. In his hands, he held twin curved blades, a hybrid of daggers and the fangs of some monstrous beast. Matthew blinked. He understood now. They wanted him to fight against the strongest warrior of the tribe, or at least, the strongest as he perceived. The deep bellow of a war horn cut through the night, signaling the start. Raul Kor lunged. He was faster than Matthew had anticipated. A blur of motion, and the first blade sliced through the air toward his throat. Matthew barely had time to twist aside, feeling the rush of wind as the blade narrowly missed. But Raul Kor had already accounted for that. His foot pivoted with unnatural precision, swinging the second blade in a vicious arc toward Matthew's ribs. Matthew ducked, barely escaping. The curved edge whistled past, missing by mere millimeters. For a split second, he felt the cold kiss of metal against his skin. Too fast. Matthew staggered back, trying to keep his distance. Raul Kor didn't press the attack immediately. He moved in a slow, deliberate circle, a predator sizing up its prey. His expression wasn't tense, only filled with absolute confidence. Matthew knew he couldn't match this brute in raw strength or speed. But he'd survived worse. He'd fought enemies far more terrifying across the stars. And experience was its own kind of weapon. When Raul Kor lunged again, Matthew didn't fully evade. He let the blade skim dangerously close to his shoulder while twisting his body, using the momentum to drive a sharp counterpunch into Raul Kor's ribs. It landed, and did absolutely nothing. Raul Kor barely reacted, except to smirk in disdain. Too slow. His elbow came crashing down. Matthew tried to move, but there was no time. The impact was like being struck by a warhammer, sending him sprawling backward. The breath ripped from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, gasping. If this kept up, he wouldn't last much longer. Raul Kor, sensing his victory, rolled his shoulders and stepped forward, preparing to end the fight. Then the sound came, a deep, guttural growl. Matthew froze. That wasn't human. That wasn't anything he'd ever heard before. The air itself seemed to change, becoming thick, oppressive. The warriors surrounding the fight all turned, their expressions shifting from excitement to unease. Their eyes locked onto the dense, suffocating darkness of the jungle beyond. A cold wind swept through the camp, carrying a scent that sent a primal warning deep into Matthew's instincts. Death. Even Raul Kor hesitated, for the first time, in those eyes filled with nothing but arrogant certainty. There was fear. The Gryvals had arrived. The darkness split apart as two burning red eyes emerged from the void, cold, soulless, sweeping across the open ground before locking onto Matthew and Raul Kor. An invisible weight pressed down on the space around them, a suffocating force that seemed to squeeze the air itself. The once fearless warriors of the tribe instinctively stepped back, their usual ferocity reduced to tense, shadowed figures beneath the flickering firelight. Matthew stared at the creature approaching. A Gryvals. It stood over 3 meters tall, its body clad in a metallic hide that reflected the fire's glow in strange, shifting patterns. Each step it took sent tremors through the earth, its claws digging deep into the soil. But the most terrifying part wasn't its sheer size, nor the glint of unnatural intelligence in its eyes. It was the tail, a long, sinuous appendage lined with razor-sharp spines, curling and uncoiling like a serpent poised to strike, a weapon designed for one thing, destruction. Matthew swallowed hard. This wasn't an animal. It was a killing machine. The Gryvals parted its jaws, releasing a piercing screech that cut through the night like jagged glass. Rows of dagger-like teeth gleamed in the firelight. At the same time, its glowing eyes pulsed, Emitting a faint, almost imperceptible flicker, Matthew froze. A strange numbness spread through his limbs, a paralyzing sensation creeping along his spine like ice. His breath caught in his throat. He tried to move, but it was like invisible chains had wrapped around his body, locking him in place. His vision swam, his mind reeling from the sudden vertigo. Its eyes, they could induce neural paralysis. A blood-curdling scream tore through the night. Ralkor, the strongest warrior of the tribe, the man who had stood tall in the arena just moments ago, was now staggering backward in utter panic. His face contorted with terror, sweat pouring down his temples. His lips trembled, forming words that never fully escaped. Then he turned and ran. The entire tribe fell silent, but it didn't last. One by one, as if the sight of Ralkor's retreat shattered whatever courage they had left. The warriors dropped their weapons and fled. The once mighty hunters of this land dissolved into the darkness, swallowed by the frantic echoes of their own footfalls. Matthew clenched his jaw. They left him and Zyra to face the beast alone. The Grivals wasted no time. With a guttural roar, it lunged, moving like a living missile of muscle and death. Matthew tried to sidestep, but the lingering numbness still held his muscles hostage. He barely registered the incoming attack before a blur of motion yanked him back. Zyra, the warrior woman, dragged him out of the way just as the creature's tail lashed through the space where he had been standing, a fraction of a second slower, and he would have been cleaved in half. She shouted something in her native tongue. Instantly, from the surrounding brush, shadows burst forth, wolf-like creatures, their bodies armored in hardened scales, emerged from the undergrowth. They growled, their eyes reflecting the firelight as they encircled the Grivals in a tight formation. Moving with an eerie, coordinated precision, Matthew turned to Zyra, disbelief flashing across his face. Did she just summon them? But there was no time for answers. Zyra grasped his wrist, her golden eyes burning with resolve. Fight or die, choose. There was no choice. Matthew tightened his grip on his weapon. Inhaling deeply, they would fight. Matthew tightened his grip on the gun, his hands still trembling from the lingering shock of Grival's attack. Around him, the wolf-like creatures with hardened scales prowled in the darkness, their guttural growls reverberating like echoes of unseen specters. Zyra stood beside him, her curved blade glinting in the glow of smoldering embers. Her golden eyes burned with unshakable resolve. The Grivals halted for a brief moment, its glowing gaze sweeping across the battlefield, calculating, analyzing, assessing threats, and then, like a programmed executioner, it surged forward once more. Matthew and Zyra moved at the same time. Matthew rolled to the side, his gunfire cutting through the night, sharp, precise shots aimed directly at the beast's core. But the metallic hide absorbed the bullets with ease, leaving nothing but faint scratches in their wake. Damn it, Zyra, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. With an almost instinctual motion, she let out a low, reverberating sound, inaudible to Matthew. But the scaled beasts responded instantly. They attacked like lightning. One leapt, sinking its fangs into Grival's throat, while another coiled around its legs, attempting to drag it down. The beast roared, thrashing violently, flinging its assailants aside, but each time one was thrown, another took its place, tearing, clawing, biting. Matthew saw his opening. He needed to distract it. His eyes darted around, burned out logs from the collapsed bonfires. The stone pillars surrounding the clearing. An idea took shape. Keep it busy, Matthew shouted as he sprinted toward one of the pillars. Zyra didn't ask questions, she simply nodded before pivoting, her curved blade flashing like a silver arc. Matthew yanked a length of cable from his belt, securing one end to the base of a pillar before dashing behind the Grivals, stretching the wire taut across its path. A simple trap. If it charged, it would trip, but Grivals wasn't stupid. It roared, tossing the creatures aside in a final, explosive effort. Then, without warning, it lunged straight at Matthew. He had less than a fraction of a second to react. He dropped, rolling to the side just as the beast's foreleg caught the cable. The momentum of its charge turned against it, its massive weight tilting forward. And then, boom, the earth trembled as Gryvols crashed to the ground, sending up a plume of dust and debris. Zyra didn't waste the moment. She was already moving, a blur of speed and lethal precision. She drove her blade down in a brutal arc, aiming for the creature's throat, one of the few spots where its metallic plating was thinner. Dark blood sprayed across the ground, but it wasn't enough. The Gryvol shrieked, a piercing, guttural sound that shook the air, then lashed out with its tail. The impact sent Zyra flying. Matthew's eyes widened as he saw her body slam against the ground. Zyra, he sprinted toward her, gun raised, emptying the last rounds straight into the beast's glowing eyes. The Gryvol snarled, recoiling in pain, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned, and then it vanished into the darkness. Not in retreat, not in fear, but because it knew the hunt wasn't over yet. Matthew dropped to his knees beside Zyra. Her breath came in ragged gasps, blood seeping through the armor on her shoulder. The wound wasn't fatal, but if she lost too much blood, she wouldn't last long. He glanced around. The tribe was gone. Only the two of them remained in the ruined battlefield. Matthew exhaled sharply. He could leave now. He could walk away. But when he looked at Zyra, at the way she had fought, at the fire in her eyes, at the unwavering strength even as she bled, he knew he couldn't abandon her. A newfound resolve settled in his chest. He lifted her, steadying her weight against him, and turned toward the remnants of the abandoned village. Tonight, they had survived, but the fight was far from over. Matthew carefully lowered Zyra onto a patch of soft earth beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient tree. The armor on her shoulder was soaked in blood. The wound wasn't fatal, but if it got infected, it could still kill her. He quickly checked his pack. Medical supplies were nearly depleted. Back on Earth, this would have been a simple fix, a few stitches, some antibiotics, but out here, deep in the heart of an untamed world, he had only one option. Use whatever nature provided. Drawing his knife, he carefully cut away the damaged armor around her wound. She let out a faint groan but remained silent, her golden eyes narrowing in wary determination. I don't have any proper medicine, Matthew muttered, scanning the area, but I'll do what I can. He recalled watching the native tribes, how they used strange plants with remarkable healing properties. Some of them emitted a sharp, pungent scent, possibly natural antiseptics. He had to find them. Turning back to Zyra, he said, "Stay put, don't move." She gave a slight nod, her gaze losing some of its earlier tension. Matthew moved swiftly into the undergrowth, relying on his survival instincts. Bioluminescent plants pulsed faintly in the dim light, casting eerie glows along the forest floor. Eventually, he spotted thick, fleshy leaves secreting a gel-like substance, similar to aloe vera. He'd seen the tribes use it on their wounded warriors. Returning to Zyra, he crushed the leaves, extracting the gel, and gently applied it to her wound. She clenched her jaw, eyes shutting tight as the pain surged through her body. "Hold still," Matthew said. "This will keep it from getting infected." She exhaled slowly but didn't say a word. After a few moments, when the pain dulled, Zyra opened her eyes, watching him intently. "You're not like the others." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "You've met people like me before?" A faint smile crossed her lips, but there was a sadness behind it. "Not directly, but I know of them. Those who come from the sky, taking what they want, stripping this world bare, never thinking about what they leave behind." Matthew didn't argue. He couldn't. Humanity had carved its way across countless worlds, extracting resources, leaving scars in its wake. "I'm not here to conquer anything," he said finally. "I just want to survive." Zyra studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a great warrior," she murmured, "but my people, they didn't believe women could be strong. They wanted me to be a mother, a caretaker." She paused, her eyes drifting toward the softly glowing treetops. "So I fought," she continued. "I proved myself in the hunt. In battle, in leadership, but no matter what I did, they always doubted me. Matthew listened. In the dim light, she wasn't just a hardened fighter, she was someone caught between tradition and ambition. Between expectation and the need to carve her own path. And now, he asked. Zyra let out a quiet laugh. Now I'm lying here, wounded, being tended to by an outsider. Matthew chuckled. Could be worse. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and their steady breaths. Matthew leaned back, gazing up at the sky of this untamed world. Lepollard wasn't just a hostile wilderness. It held secrets. Secrets that stretched beyond human understanding. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he really wanted to leave. A few days later, with Zyra's strength returning, Matthew decided it was time to track the Gryvals. Their search led them deep into the forbidden zone of the tribe's territory. Towering trees loomed overhead, their dense canopy shrouding the jungle in an eerie twilight. The silence was absolute, so much so that Matthew could hear the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then, through the thick foliage, something massive emerged. It was no natural formation. Rising before them was a structure of immense scale, ancient, forgotten, and wholly alien. Walls of black stone, draped in thick vines, stood defiant against time, but Matthew knew, without a doubt, that this place had not been built by the local tribes. This was the work of something older. Zyra stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the cold stone of the entrance. The moment her skin made contact, faint symbols flickered to life beneath her touch. This place is forbidden, she murmured. The elders say it carries a curse. Matthew studied the glowing inscriptions. He couldn't decipher them, but every instinct in his body screamed that this was no ordinary ruin. This was a tomb, a vault, or worse, a warning. They pushed forward. A gust of frigid air swept past them as they stepped inside. Carrying the stale scent of decay and forgotten time, the walls were adorned with murals, intricate carvings depicting towering figures with glowing eyes, encased in what appeared to be metallic exoskeletons. Then, Matthew saw it. One of the creatures in the carvings bore an unsettling resemblance to the Gryvals. His pulse quickened. He moved toward a central relief, larger, more elaborate than the rest. It depicted a group of these ancient beings standing in a circle around a pulsating sphere of energy. "You're certain your people didn't build this?" he asked. Zyra shook her head. "No, it was here long before we were." Deeper they ventured, the farther they went, the more Matthew realized this wasn't just stone. The dark walls, once thought to be solid rock, were actually corroded metal. Some sections of the structure still bore faint traces of artificial alloys. Then, they reached it, a massive chamber, its air thick with centuries of neglect. In its center stood a cylindrical device, almost entirely overtaken by moss and vines. Matthew stepped forward, and the ruin awoke. A flicker of light, a faint electronic hum. The panel beside the device crackled, then illuminated. A weak transmission pulsed through. A message lost in time, now reawakened. Lines of text appeared on the screen. Matthew's HUD auto-translation kicked in. Experiment number 07 Gryvals. Project failed. Subjects continue to evolve beyond containment parameters. A chill ran down his spine. The Gryvals weren't native to this world. They were made, weapons, bred for war, and worse, they were still evolving. A sharp beep echoed from the console. A data stream had just been decrypted. Warning. Omega-class entity in stasis. Estimated awakening. Next solar cycle. Matthew stiffened. Omega? Zyra glanced at him, concern in her golden eyes. "What is it?" Before he could answer, the screen shifted. A holographic projection materialized. A creature, colossal, its form dwarfing the Gryvals they had faced before. Its eyes blazed with raw energy, and the biometal plating across its body pulsed with eerie, luminescent veins. Matthew's throat went dry. What they had fought before, what had nearly killed them, had only been a failed prototype. Omega was the perfected version, and it was about to wake up. Matthew stared at the holographic image of the monstrous being. Lines of fragmented data continued to scroll across the ancient console. Records of the Grivals, of a long-dead civilization's desperate attempts to contain them. In the end, they had failed. His jaw tightened. If this Omega-class entity awakened, it wouldn't just be the tribe that suffered. The entire planet of Lepollard would descend into a nightmare. Then, a sharp beep. Matthew turned as the console registered a new signal. Something was approaching from orbit. His heart pounded as he recognized the source. A rescue vessel. The Human Alliance had received his distress call before his ship went down. Help was coming. Relief surged through him. This was his way off this cursed world. He turned to Zyra, the dim blue glow from the console reflected in her golden eyes. "You can come with me," he said firmly. "We can leave before things get worse." For a moment, she hesitated. To her people, he was an outsider, a stranger, but to Matthew, she was the only person on this planet he could trust. Zyra began, but the words never left her lips. A piercing shriek tore through the air. Matthew and Zyra bolted outside. Above them, the sky churned with crimson spirals, Grival's call sign. But this time, it wasn't alone. In the distance, beyond the jungle canopy, the tribal encampment came into view, and with it, a scene of horror. A sacrifice was about to take place. At the heart of the village, 3 young members of the tribe knelt on a massive stone altar. Their heads bowed in solemn resignation. Surrounding them, robed elders chanted in a rhythmic, haunting tone, their voices rising as ancient symbols blazed to life around the platform. A group of warriors stood watch, gripping ceremonial blades. Matthew's blood ran cold. "What the hell is going on?" he hissed. Zyra's face paled. "They believe if they offer a sacrifice, the Grivals won't attack the village." Matthew clenched his fists. "We can't let this happen." But Zyra didn't answer immediately. This was her tribe. This was the belief she had been raised with. Since childhood, she had been told that the Grivals were gods, unstoppable forces of nature. To defy them was to invite death. Yet, everything she had seen in the temple, everything Matthew had told her, what if her people had been wrong all along? Matthew placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was steady. "You don't have to follow them anymore. Come with me. Let's stop this." She met his gaze. This wasn't just an offer. It was a choice, a chance to break free, to fight not just for survival, but for the future of her people. Her grip tightened around her spear. Determination burned in her eyes. "Let's go." The crimson spirals in the sky churned violently, heralding the nightmare to come. Matthew and Zyra sprinted toward the sacrificial site, where the young captives knelt on the stone altar, awaiting their grim fate. A deep, guttural roar erupted from the depths of the jungle. It wasn't like anything Matthew had heard before, richer, more powerful, laced with an unnatural menace. From the darkness, a colossal Grivals emerged. This was no longer the wild beast they had once encountered. It had evolved. Its metallic hide, now an abyssal black, reflected the eerie red glow of the storm-racked sky. Its eyes didn't just shine, they pulsed with waves of raw energy, distorting the very air around them. The ground trembled beneath its presence. Then, with a flick of its massive tail, it struck a boulder nearby. The rock didn't just crack. It detonated, obliterated as if hit by a high-energy plasma blast. One Grivals had been terrifying enough. But this was something else. This was Lepollard's apex predator. The tribe erupted into chaos. The warriors, men who had once scoffed at Matthew, now fled like panicked prey before an oncoming storm. Matthew clenched his fists, turning to Zyra. "We have to stop it." She nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. This time, they weren't just facing a monster. They were facing something that had adapted, evolved, something that had become the ultimate predator of this world. "Stop." Matthew's voice boomed like thunder, cutting through the panic. "You can't run. If we don't fight, none of us will survive." The tribe froze, uncertainty in their wide-eyed stares. "You've lived on this planet for generations. You are not cowards." Matthew's voice was steady, commanding. You once bowed before the Gryvals, believing it to be a god, but now, you've seen the truth. It's not a deity, it's just a creature. A beast. Silence hung in the air. Fear still lingered, but something else stirred beneath it. Then, a voice rose. Matthew is right. The crowd turned. Zyra stood tall, her eyes burning like wildfire. We have no other choice. Gryvals is no god. It doesn't crave sacrifice, it craves prey. If we don't end it now, it will return, again and again, until none of us are left. She raised her spear high. No more running. We fight, for our tribe, for our survival. A heartbeat of silence. Then, a figure stepped forward. Ral Kor, the warrior once hailed as the strongest of the tribe, the man who had fled when faced with the Gryvals before. Now, he had returned. Wordlessly, he knelt, gripping his spear with both hands. Then, with a single, thunderous motion, he slammed it against the ground. A vow, a reckoning. The others hesitated, then, one by one, they followed, spears, axes, blades, all raised high, then brought down in unison, hammering the earth in a rising war rhythm. The sound was deafening, a heartbeat, a war drum, a declaration. They were no longer a scattered, frightened crowd, they were warriors, and this time, they would fight. The war drums echoed through the pitch-black forest, blending with the enraged roar of the beast. The evolved Gryvals stood before the tribe, towering, monstrous, unlike anything they had ever faced. Its eyes burned like twin hellish furnaces. Sweeping over the warriors, those caught in its gaze felt an eerie paralysis creeping through their bodies. Bring it down, now, Matthew shouted, but before anyone could react, the Gryvals charged. A warrior screamed as the creature's tail lashed out, sending him crashing into the rocks, his body shattered on impact. The tribe thrust their spears at its metallic hide, but it was futile. Their primitive weapons couldn't pierce the evolved armor of this monstrosity. Aim for the joints. Zyra's voice rang out, not just fighting but commanding. She closed her eyes, extending her hand, reaching out to the planet's ecosystem. From above, predatory birds shrieked in excitement before diving, razor-sharp talons slashing at the creature's glowing eyes. Below, smaller creatures swarmed, attacking the weak points in its armor. The Gryvals bellowed in fury, thrashing wildly. Matthew and Zyra were thrown aside. Matthew slammed into a tree, his body aching, but he knew this thing would not be stopped. The beast stood amidst the battlefield, a nightmarish form of absolute destruction. Its bio-armor was slick with blood, and its crimson eyes gleamed with an intelligence far more sinister than any beast before it. Matthew tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, sweat trickling down his spine. The tribe had fought to their last breath, yet nothing had made a difference. What could possibly kill this thing? Ral Kor, the strongest warrior, swung his massive spear like a hammer, only for the tip to snap upon impact. A second later, the Gryval's tail lashed out, slamming Ral Kor into a boulder with a sickening crunch. Zyra screamed, her hands reaching forward, desperate to reconnect with the life force of the world. Hundreds of forest creatures attacked, clawing, biting, tearing at the Gryvals, but it had evolved beyond them all. They were nothing more than insects against the fury of a god of destruction. A colossal predator lunged at its throat. With a single retaliatory snap, the Gryvals crushed its skull like a berry. The tribe was losing hope. We can't stop it, we're all going to die. Matthew clenched his teeth, forcing himself to stand firm against the terror. No, it couldn't end like this. The Gryvals advanced, a deep wound on its shoulder knitting itself back together at an unnatural speed. Matthew turned to Zyra, his voice sharp with urgency. Is there another weakness? Zyra took a trembling breath, eyes locked on the creature. Maybe it fears fire. Matthew froze. Fire, an insane idea took root in his mind. He yanked his communicator, frantically switching to emergency frequencies. This is Matthew Gallagher. If any human alliance vessel can hear me, respond. We are fighting an unkillable creature. We need firepower now. Silence. The tribe was losing. Another warrior fell, torn apart by the Gryval's claws, his blood splattered across Matthew's face. Desperation clawed at his throat. There was no one. With a roar, he tightened his grip on his weapon and charged. The Gryval swiped, sending Matthew flying. He hit the ground hard, tumbling, lungs burning. Zyra was beside him, eyes filled with anguish. Is this it? Do we have no other choice? Matthew lifted his head. The beast was closing in. Was this the end? Beep. A voice cut through the hopelessness. This is the Human Alliance rescue ship Hyperion. We received your signal. Matthew froze. They came. Target my coordinates, he bellowed. The response was swift. Confirmed. Preparing to fire high-frequency plasma barrage. Countdown. 30 seconds. Matthew staggered to his feet, eyes locked on the Gryvals. It sensed the danger. The beast roared, a fury beyond comprehension burning in its gaze. It charged, faster, stronger, determined to crush them before the blast could land. Matthew gritted his teeth, overloading his plasma rifle. 15 seconds. The Gryvals was only 20 meters away. Matthew aimed for its half-healed wound and fired. A searing plasma bolt tore through its body, making it falter. 5 seconds. The Gryval shrieked, its final defiance splitting the air. 0 seconds. The sky exploded. From orbit, a crimson plasma beam descended, a wrathful judgment from the heavens. The entire forest trembled. The shockwave obliterated everything, the heat fusing the ground into molten glass. Matthew felt himself lifted, thrown, his world fracturing into a storm of fire. Then, silence. Matthew coughed, pushing himself upright. The tribe had survived, but they had witnessed the impossible. The Gryvals lay there, its armor charred, body convulsing. It was still alive, but too weak to fight. For the first time, it fled. They had won, but Lepollard would never be safe. Matthew turned to Zyra. Her eyes burned with determination. You can come with me, he said. We can find a way to end this for good. Zyra looked at her tribe. Then, she nodded. I will not run, she whispered. I will go, but not to escape, only to find a way to end this nightmare, forever. Matthew smiled. The gateway to the stars had opened.